Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second to last lecture in this 12-part series on medieval Armenian poetry. I've enjoyed preparing this series so much, and honestly, just kind of like sharing with you my findings from week to week, because a lot of the material, especially in this later part of the series, is not super familiar to me. I know some general things about who the main figures are and what kind of things they wrote, but I hadn't read a lot of the things or really, looked into it in a serious way before preparing for this series. So it's been a lot of fun for me to discover things and then share them with you all. So today we're going to look at Nahapet Kuchak and the Hayren. Has anyone heard this term before, Hayren? Hayren, or even sometimes hayeren, automatically.
It's like folk poetry.
Exactly. So we'll talk about it a little more later, but already it should signal to you like, something key related to Armenian, because hayeren is the word for Armenian, the Armenian language. So this genre of poetry, something specific Armenian about it. It's very interesting looking back at the way the Hayren and Nahapet Kuchak have been presented in scholarship and in publication. So there's been over 100 years of publications of the works of Nahapet Kuchak and Hayrens in general. And the understanding of these texts, this figure, evolved over time. So in the late 19th century, there was a figure, Aristakis Tevgans, a scholar who published a book in 1882 in Tiflis. You can see it, the first one on the right there, Hayer Kmeredi Doch Yev Yergek. And in this book, he presented some of the works, poetic works, and he identified this colophon, which is on the left part of the screen, which is found in an Avadaran, a gospel manuscript, written in 1637 in the village of Charakonis, which is near Van. So on the map, you can see kind of on the far right, the pink Van the city and region, and Charakonis was a village in that region. I wasn't actually sure exactly where it was located. I wasn't able to find a map of it. But anyway, in that region. And this colophon near the end says, Hishetsek is Kuchag, Yevmus Genagits Tang Khatunen, his wife. Tarziel Hishetsek is Kuchak, Yev Izmed Bapenur Nahapet Varbeden, Bormaganun Ashil Kuchagasi. So, which means remember Kuchag and okay, actually, there's a little bit skipped here. So remember Kuchak and his wife partner, Tang Khatunen. Also remember Kuchak and his grandfather, Nahapet Varbeden, Master Nahapet, who was called Ashur, which is like troubadour, that traveling singer, essentially, poet, musician. Kuchak. So from this colophon emerged this figure, Nahapet Kuchak, which in some manuscripts, there are some works attributed to him. But these early scholars, Tevgans and Chobanian published books in Paris, they collected lots and lots of these poems in a genre called hayeren, which we'll look at, and basically attributed everything to Nahapet Kuchak. And in a later work, Chobanian says, like, or his followers, meaning like people who wrote after the same manner that he did. So in this early period of scholarship, when they were just, still identifying figures, it was natural to think that to want to have a name to put to all the texts, and you find a great writer or a great figure and you kind of attribute a lot of things to them. The hayeren, there's a vast body of poetic works in this genre. And a next generation of scholars led by people like Manu Gabelian, working in Armenia, one of the most important, probably the most important 20th century Armenian literary historian, and also Nersess, I think Nersess Aginian, a Mechitura scholar, and some others presented a whole different view of the authorship and origin of these works. And so it's essentially broken down here on the bottom. You see like the one author theory, like, oh, this all from Nahapet Kuchak, or, people who followed him, or that these were, a vast body of works that have anonymous / collective composition. Not just one figure, but many figures who made and produced these works, and most of them were performed and sung. And because a lot of these were transmitted orally, they could be modified and adapted, or maybe a singer likes one verse, but he wants to change slightly a different verse. This would happen, and they weren't interested in preserving one single text. They were much more fluid. These were fluid poems and songs that people would modify and adapt in different occasions. And fast forwarding to a later collection that I'll talk about, when you bring all of these texts together, you can see that there's many different versions of the same poem / song. Where they'll differ in a line or a couple lines or some words here and there. And it really shows how these were texts that were dynamic and evolved and changed over time. So in the early period of scholarship, these works were published kind of in piecemeal, in bits and pieces. So, people would look in manuscripts in the Mechituras Library of Venice and Vienna or elsewhere, and find a few manuscripts that had a lot of things and a lot of these, and kind of bring it out as a book. One of the early collections here was done by Arshad Chobanian, and he later expanded it in this collection from 1940 called Hayren Purastana. And he divided the hayrens he found by their genre or theme. So you can see Siro Yerker, Banduchti Yerker, and then Kharadagan, Alapanagan, Yevgronagan Daver. So songs about love, songs about Banducht, meaning like a migrant worker or exile, like Gharib, similar. And then also Kharadagan, like instructional, wisdom, sort of ones like we've seen. Ayla Panagan, allegorical, and Goronagan, religious themes on religious topics. And the majority of these are Siro Yerker, their love songs is the most common, and then there's also the others. This was Chobanian's earliest collection called Nahapet Kuchaki Divana. You can see also Siro Yerker, Kharadagan, Panagan, Bantuchti. So yes, there's one book here by a collection of some of the Armenian text in the back. Diana de Hovhanessian, the poet, she collected some from Chobanian's collections, and then she made some English translations of them. And her translations are very free, I would say. They're very free and fluid, not necessarily like, literal scholarly translations, but beautiful translations nonetheless. In the 50s, there was this book published that collected a lot more hayrens from manuscripts in Armenia, where the two that Chobanian put out were mostly from the Mokhitares. But in the 50s, Lugasyan published this Hayreni Garkov, and Abelian published a collection. He called it Gusanagan Vertagan Yerker, so folk songs of the Gusans. So linking it to the ancient, remember we saw the Gusans, the ancient, even going back to pre-Christian times, the oral bards and singers. And through Abelian and other, at the time, their research, they really demonstrated well that a lot of these texts go back to a much earlier period than the 17th century when this Nahapet Kuchak figure lived. And found some materials and manuscripts from as early as the 13th century and 14th century, and argued for these texts as having a much longer history and being composed and circulated by many, many people and developing over time, and then only in a little bit later period starting to be written down. This all led up to, there's also this interesting, so in the 70s, Nahapet Kuchak was very popular. As you'll see with some of the poems, he's one of the first poets and writers to like deliberately present non-religious material, or even like somewhat anti-religious material, in still a sort of religious framework or a playful sort of way, where, as you'll see, he's taking religious themes but applying them to love or physical pursuit. So it's almost like a reverse allegory, where Christian patristic writers would use human love as an allegory for love between God and the church, or the human being and God. He does the opposite. He takes religious language and applies it to human relationships, love relationships, as we'll see. And so that was very popular in, you can imagine, the Soviet period. They loved that kind of thing. So his works and these hayrens were published a lot. And there's this in the 70s, translations were made, these attractive little books with the Armenian on one side and the other language on the other, were made in English, Russian, Armenian, and German. This all led up to the work of Manatsaganyan, who in the intro to this huge 1,000-page book, where he collected all the hayrens he could from all the manuscript repositories and published works he could get a hold of, and grouped them together and published all the different versions that he could. He mentions in the beginning, in the intro, that he started working on this project in 1940. And you can see the publication date, it's 1995. So he died in 1983, but he worked basically 40 years on this. And then all his work was finally published posthumously, where we now have, he tried to be as complete as possible in gathering all the hayrens he could and bringing them together. So what's so interesting through his research and what he was able to do was he showed that I guess I don't have it on here. The earliest hayeren genre he could find, and we'll talk specifically what a hayeren line and genre is, but he identified that even Gregory of Nareg, in some of his odes, the kind of shorter liturgical works for different feast days, used the hayeren genre and line composition in writing his dolls. And so did Nersess Spring in some of his, and so did some other figures. So actually, this genre goes much, much further back. And as early as we have poetry, which Gregory of Nareg is one of the first, we see this genre already being used. So it could be much even ancient, more ancient still, and we maybe lost some earlier texts that were around. And that also connects with how this genre is even called. So hayeren is essentially a way of saying this is the like Armenian form. It's short for hayeren. So it's like the most quintessential Armenian verse composition. So let's look at what actually a hayeren is. So most often these are 4-line poems, but the hayeren line can be used in poems of any length. And the line is usually composed of 15 syllables. Sorry, this says usually 15 lines. It's meant to say usually 15 syllables. Sometimes 14 or 16, it can vary. And the syllables are usually, there's a break in the middle, and the first half of the line has 7, and the next half has 8. And it alternates with the feet, or the subunit of the line, such that you get 2 syllables grouped together, then 3, then 2, then you get the break, and then 3, 2, 3. So it alternates to make like a perfectly balanced line. Beautiful symmetry. And then often they rhyme. And the rhyme schemes can vary. They could all rhyme with each other. You could have 1 and 3, 2 and 4, or different kind of rhymes. Oh, here I put that as early as Gregory of Narek's odes, you see this form used. So let's just read an example. This is a famous hayeren that we can see or listen to and hear how it sounds. So listen to this. Yes achk utulus hoki, arans lus achken chavari. Yes zug utuchur hoki, arans chur zungen merani. Yerb zug ni churen hanen, vi al chur zaken guabri. Yerb zis ikene zaden, kansmerneln al jar chilini. So often they have just, they're short for lines. So they have one major idea or theme that they're kind of playing on. So this is one of the love hayrens, and you can see the translation here below. So I the eye, and you the light, my soul. Without light, the eye darkens. I the fish, and you the water, my soul. Without water, the fish dies. When they remove fish from its water and throw it in other water, it survives. When they separate me from you, there's no way out for me but to die. So you can see really they're very pleasant and clever like this. Very, very, very clever and kind of catchy. And they would have been sung, surely. And yeah, so here's a great example of a love hayeren. And I ended up doing my own translations for all of these just because, yeah, I didn't there was always something a little off about what I was finding. So I just wanted to do my own for these. So let's continue looking at, and we'll basically just have a little scan and survey of the different types of hayrens you can find. So several on love. We'll look at some of the instructional religious ones and some of the gharib sort of ones, and then end with one at the end. So I just found these ones that kind of like inverted the religious scheme to be so interesting. And so I collected several of those and thought we could read those together. And it'll be especially nice because we've always had, religious material, written by monastics, all this sort of stuff. And now we get to see like just something different. So let's look at these. So, and this lecture, I should say, is basically rated like PG-13. So be warned in advance. Because I tried not to use as explicit language in the English translation as the Armenian uses, just to modify things a little, but we'll see here. So, Kani Marin Zisperer, Kahanai Chem Hosovaner, Urde Kahana Deser, Nadzere Jampus Uyeler, Urde Meg Arvor Deser, Tirgud Zots Vitem Knatzer, Zotzig Nem Jamdunarel, Zodzerunem Hosovaner. So it says, since my mother bore me, gave birth to me, I have not confessed to a priest. Wherever or whenever I saw a priest, I turned and ran the other way. Wherever I saw a beauty, like a beautiful woman, I rushed or ran into her embrace, her bosom, and her face. I have made her breasts my church. So Tzignem Jamdunarel. And I have confessed to her teats, essentially. So you see what I mean, how he's taking religious language and terminology and kind of like turning it on its head, doing the exact opposite, essentially, of the approach that we saw last week with Hovannes Tolkuransi, who starts from, human love, desire, all these things he feels, and gives them full expression, but then at the end turns it back to calling our attention upwards towards the higher spiritual plane. This is like a blatant turn in the other direction. And even like, boasting about that, just rubbing it in your face almost, how much it's going against the religious mentality or the spiritual directives. And one of the things that does is emphasize, in all these poems, there's the contrast between, the spiritual and the material in physical terms, or in temporal terms, the transient and the eternal. Like what is here and transient and passing versus what is beyond death. And they're always, it's human nature to be consumed in the moment. And the writers we've seen before are always trying to tell you, don't get lost in this moment, focus on the eternal, focus on what is beyond change, won't fade away and die. And these poems do the exact opposite. They say they get consumed with the present and basically just say, it's so good, just give yourself to it. I don't even care that I'm going to suffer forever and ever after death. That kind of mentality. This one is amazing. Okay, so it says, Kod zotzete jermag dajar, kod zotzerete kanteri bar. Yertam yes jamgoch olam, kam linim dajrit ilusarar. So that's the man speaking, and then the woman replies, Kanadzo dera duchmar, chivai lesta jaris lusarar. Yertastun charov linas, utorus da jaris ichavar. So he says, your bosom is a white cathedral, your teats lanterns of flame. Let me go and toll the bell, as in like for the church service. Let me be lamplighter of your cathedral, with all the innuendos, implied. And she responds, go away, stupid boy. You're unworthy to be the lamplighter of my cathedral. Chivailes dajadas lusarar. Go off, play with yourself, and leave my cathedral in darkness. And I don't know, there's different ways the last line could be read. I took it as like, obviously the way I took it, and go play with yourself rather than with me. Or it could even be that she's saying you would go and enjoy yourself. Like if I were to let you be my lover, you would just experience your own pleasure and not give pleasure to me. You wouldn't light my temple. So that's why you're unworthy. Like you wouldn't be a good lover, essentially. I think it could be read either way. I incline towards the first one. But yeah, so very, very different from the kind of things we've seen, but so skillful in the composition of the works, the metaphors used, the religious language, and the way it puts so much into your mind, but using religious words. It very, very skillfully done. Again, playing with light, fire, darkness, darkness, light, fire, all these sort of things that we've seen used to speak about realities on the spiritual plane. They're using to talk about physical and sensual realities. And what's so great about all of these works in Middle Armenian is the language is so colloquial, because they're not writing in the high Karapar classical Armenian literary standard, and there is no essentially standardized modern language. They freely write like how they talk. And in some ways, some of these texts read as more natural and colloquial than even some modern Armenian poetry written today, which is afraid to use or steers away from using like foreign words and borrowings and colloquialisms and tries to write in a high refined literary style. These are not really like that. They're very natural. Here's another, which does the same exact kind of thing. Look at this. Kodzotsete diroch maran, kodzotzerete salmosaran, yertam haperalinim, yevkami ikodzotset genam. Ein chap I pupenasem, inchvor kodzotsut diranam. So this one plays with all kinds of things around monastic education and monastic life, but uses it all as a metaphor for mastering the woman's body and wanting to be her lover. So it says, your bosom is the Lord's cellar, your teats a psalter. Let me go and become a monk and come and stand before your bosom. I'll recite the alphabet so much that I'll become master of your breasts, or until I become master of your breasts. So what is all the imagery and significance of this language? So some of you may know that Armenian education up until the very, very modern period was connected with monasteries. There were monastic schools. So that was where you went to learn to read and write. And you would only really learn to read and write if you were going to pursue a religious vocation, either be a monk or a priest. So he's saying, so obviously, you would go there and you would study so hard, and your basically main, what today would be like your English literature or your grammar textbook was the Psalter, because the monks, that was the core text that would be used in chanting all the liturgical hours, the Jamais Coutume, and they would memorize all 150 psalms by the time their education was done. And that was what they would use to practice reading, to learn to reading, and those would be the first texts they would master and memorize. And so he's saying, I want your breasts to be my psalter, meaning like I'll study them day and night, essentially. And he says, I'll go and become a monk. And he's saying, I'll stand before your breasts. So the image is, if you picture not the Badarak, but the prayer services in the church that happen before the Badarak or at different times, the priests and deacons are up at the front, not on the altar, but down in the tas, in the chancel. And the deacon especially will go up and stand in the middle and recite from the Psalter the psalms for the day, or the karos and different things. And that's the image he's using. I want to go and stand, before your bosom, like the monk would go and stand before the Psalter. And I'll recite the alphabet so much. I'll again here, like, it's about, the image is about learning to read, practicing, studying, etc. But he wants to study her breasts, is what he's saying. So again, so skillful in the in the metaphor and analogies and the way things are done. Okay, and then this one is so interesting because it imagines an encounter between, this same type of figure who has just embraced the physical pleasures or love, we could say, and he's imagining what's he going to say to God on Judgment Day about this. So he says, Inchanam gam inchlinam, urdasnu malvor nasirem, teas havidenits badjar namusel, yasir tamasem, Zalegan aili kirgasarnem, yavastudzo yertam tsutsanem, Zalegan tuasadzatzir, inch ermech tenes tesirem. Basically saying, what could I do, or what could I be? When I see beauty or a beautiful one, I love her or it. Even if I learn the cause of eternity, meaning like even if I understood, could comprehend eternity or infinity or whatever, I would still go and recite. This is how I interpreted this. Even if I learn the cause of eternity, I would still go and recite poetry. I wouldn't give up poetry just because I had learned all the ins and outs of theology. That's what I think he's saying, but maybe there's other ways to interpret it. I would take the beautiful one in my arms. I would take the beautiful one in my embrace, and I would go and show her to God and say, you created this beauty. Why do you blame me if I love her? So that's the defense he's imagining that he would give, which you really recognize that feeling, even if you take it on a serious level. It's like anyone who's struggled or fought to overcome something, whether it's maybe you're trying to go on a diet or maybe you're trying to stop, I don't know what, but it's that same feeling of like, why is this thing that's bad for me, at least in certain contexts or to a certain measure or extent, so pleasurable? Why was it made that way if I'm not meant to experience and enjoy it? And especially some of these, if maybe some of these did come from monks or monastic figures, you could see all the more who, especially in that time, in that period, people didn't choose to become monks in most cases. They were sent to become monks by their parents or whatever at a young age, even oftentimes before puberty, as kids. And so you can imagine all the more how difficult it would be to accept something that you didn't even choose. But yeah, the voices that come out in these texts are so real and human and read in such an immediate way. It's really stands out from a lot of the other texts we have in pre-modern Armenian. Okay, so let's look at a couple that deal with these themes of the gharib. Remember, the gharib is someone who, for one reason or another, lives away from his home where he grew up. Maybe he moved for work. Maybe he was in exile, forced out of his home, or a refugee, or other immigrant of some sort. So this one is great. He says, Yagin u chabar perin. So chabar is like Arabic, chabar, news. Yagin u chabar perin. Te ko yarn yeger hapega. Push armatsken zispadets. Te na vons yagav hapega. Pernik ner shakri sovor. Ajab vons gerav na pakla. Ansnig ner shapki sovor. Ajab vons hakav na vala. So again, this is a great example of what I meant, how in modern Armenian, especially modern Western Armenian, you would not write with, Arabic words or Persian words or Turkish words. Those would be taken out and you would be sure to use the Armenian. But in these texts, they didn't worry about that. They freely used Arabic, Persian, Turkish as it felt right to them, or as it fit the meter of the line even, or things like that. So ajab, I read and learned, was Arabic, meaning like artiok, like how could it, kind of a question word. Mary, maybe you could confirm if that's true, if you know Arabic.
It is.
Okay. And then vala, I think maybe is also Persian or Arabic for wool. Or Turkish, I'm not sure. But so here's the translation. So they came and brought me news. So he's living far away in some other land. They came and brought me news. Your lover has become a nun. Ko yarn yeger hapera. Surprise and shock enveloped me. How could she have become a nun? Her sweet mouth was used to sugar. How could she eat fava beans? Meaning like the Lenten diet, that we're on. Like, how could she be fasting all the time when she was always one to eat sugar? Her little body was used to a dress, like fine clothing. How could she wear wool? The uncomfortable clothing that monks wear, So, and that's it. Anyway, yeah, this one also is great and just fun. And there's a lot of these hayrens that start with this line, Yaginu chabar perin, and then all kinds of different things can follow. And you can imagine the scenario, like you're far away, and then you get news about what's going on in your hometown with your dad, your brother, your mom, your lover. That's what all of these ones are. It's almost like a subgenre of these gharib ones, is Yaginu chabar perin. They came and brought news. and then you find, the surprising thing that happened while you were away. And in this big collection, one of the great things about it is he organizes, there's all these indices in the back, and one of them is by first lines or first words. So you could find all the different ones that start out Yaginu Chabar Pedin and find all the different variations and versions of this theme. Okay. There's the next two I thought was so interesting because I'd never seen this before. These are Gharib poems, but written from the perspective of the one who stayed home, not the one who went away in exile. So look at this. It's written by the perspective of the lover, probably the woman who stayed back while her lover or husband went away for whatever reason. So, Serdiga se yeger ghalam, pajnalu tuchter gukere. Gancham oh im derasvads, zamenain gharib tu bahe. Gharib kanatsadzunim, im dar deres aziskulape. Shala te shudov tarna, teche im hokis gelane. So this is so beautiful. My little heart has become a reed, qalam in Arabic, a reed, which is also the modern word for a pen, because that was the old writing instrument. My little heart has become a reed or a pen that is writing farewell letters. I cry out, "Oh my Lord God, preserve every gharib, protect or preserve every exile or immigrant worker. I have a gharib who's gone away. My sadness devours me. Im darderes, devours me. Shallah, this is short for inshallah, of course. Shallah te shudov tarna, if the Lord wills it, or hopefully, he'll return soon. Teche im hokis galane. Otherwise, my soul will leave me or abandon me." Beautiful poem. And you can see in all of these how the use of the Arabic or Persian, or when it's used, it's woven so well into the Armenian minds. It doesn't stand out as, oh, this sounds terrible. What is this doing here? Get it out of here. It comes across so natural and makes it feel very authentic and real, like it's how people talk in a poem. It really beautifully done, these works. Here's another from the same perspective. Ganchem hodi ver estadzo, zamenain gharib tu bahe, im yarni ghaributun, ir gragan zis guyere. Zir kalin in shudov are, zim amen derdes nakide. Zereses yeresin tenem, for hokis idzotzen yelane. I call to you up there, O Creator, preserve every gharib. My beloved is far away, his fire burns me. Guyere, meaning my desire, love, longing for him is burning me inside. Hasten his return to me. Irkalan in shudovare. He knows all my sadness, like the pain or suffering or sadness that I'm experiencing in his absence. Such a beautiful image. Zereses yeresin tenem. Let me put my face to his face. And I think this is what the last part of the line means. So my soul will come into my bosom. I think meaning, so instead of feeling, because they talk about sometimes like, my soul will leave me if you're not here, meaning I'll feel like a corpse. I'll feel like a dead corpse. Like I feel empty, like I'm just a corpse walking around. But if you were to return and I was to be with you, I would have that surge of life and life energy that comes from being in the presence of the beloved, being with the one you love, that gives you that surge of energy and that you feel alive. I think is what the last half of the line is saying. Okay, so now we can look at a couple of these on other themes, instructional, allegorical, or religious. I thought this was so interesting because think about Armenian geography and Armenian history. So throughout almost all of history, Armenia has been a landlocked country or place with no access to the sea. We have mountains, a lot of mountainous dwelling, but not a seafaring people. Not like the ancient Greeks who were always on boats going from island to island. And so Armenians as a people are scared of the sea and the ocean. It's like quality deep in our collective memory and experience, and it comes out even in metaphors and language and things like that. And at this time, you had Armenians traveling by boat for one of the first times in a regular way, and those were the merchants in the early modern period who would travel around by boat. And we saw, in other sessions we've seen the Matt translated the Humayil and all these texts that were used as like protective texts to keep them safe while they're on a long journey away and traveling by boat, all the danger involved in that. And look at this one, which just kind of reveals that perspective about, what kind of an idiot would go get in a boat and travel on the ocean. It says, Hashcharas yes ijur yaga, lug anked martug mikada. Torere is tsamakni pats, yereruni churn gukana. Shinere paidya daban, ein dachtagen habov gugana. Ormi ungirmi daban, luglina tsagan nafaga. So he says, I went all around this world. I found but one foolish man. This sounds like the start of like a parable, like I didn't check, but there's probably a lot that start out this way. When you're highlighting, there's one particular kind of stupid person, it's this one. And then another one could be another one. So he says, he forsook dry land and travels around on wavering water. So he left dry land and instead goes on water. He built a wooden ark and entrusts himself to that ark, or trusts in that ark to preserve him. One day the ark will sink and he'll become a meal for fish. I thought the use of ark was really significant. Again, from the Armenian perspective, it's like, we only know one guy who traveled around on an ark, and that was Noah. And that's because he had no choice. The whole world was flooded, and he built an ark just to protect him for, 40 days. And as soon as he got off of that, he stayed on dry land, planted his vineyard in Armenia, and no one ever went on water ever again after that, as far as Armenians are concerned. And so now it's like, what are you idiots doing going around voluntarily traveling the dangerous seas by water? You're begging for disaster. This is kind of the perspective here. And I just got such a kick out of this poem. Okay. This one was very interesting also, again, in this same kind of category. He says, Hokis imarmenuis yalav, na nesta archevnu latsi. Ai hoki tu urgertas, yerpkez novem yeskantani. Hokis marmenuis asads, yeses kez chigar gukidei, or gukidi. Yerpduni kagalarnu, der ners al inchpanuni. I want to read the last line once again. Yerpduni kagalarnu, deren nersnal inchpanuni. He says, my soul, he's imagining the soul, separating itself from the body, and then the soul and body speaking to each other. So my soul went out from my body, then I sat before it and wept. And then, oh, my soul, like the body or the self saying to the soul, oh, my soul, where are you going? When it's because of you that I'm alive. When it's by you, I'm alive. Remember back in Genesis, the creation story is God creates the human being out of clay and then breathes into it the breath of life. And then it becomes Gentani, becomes a living being. That's what he says here. Hokis marmnui sasats, my soul said to my body, I thought you were wise, chigar, which is, I think, again, Arabic for wise. And there was a very, very popular collection of works called chigar, which were basically these maxims. It's the ahikar is the name of the figure associated with these texts that circulated. Anyway, then the soul is still speaking. When someone comes and captures and destroys the house, why would the master stay inside? So it's very interesting. You could think, so there's two ways at least that you could take this. One is, obviously in this view of the world and humanity, it's that, while the soul is in the body, it's alive. At death, soul and body separate. The soul goes elsewhere, remains alive, and the body stays behind. And so it could be for like seeing a death sort of scene. But I think by nature of the fact that the narrator or the poet is present observing this and speaking to the soul, it must be talking about some other kind of death or destruction going on to the body that the soul is choosing to flee away from or separate itself from. And so it's a critique probably on the way the person is treating their own body, their own house that they live in. So you could take it any number of ways, maybe like you could think of the way you feel when you're slothful and, don't exercise, or you're eating terribly, or, not sleeping, or doing any number of things to just not take care of your body and not treat yourself well. Even if we just think metaphorically, like you can feel zapped and just totally depleted of your life force. And it's as if like your soul is leaving from your body. And so this perspective here is a really nice corrective to that idea of like, in this time period, you often hear it said in a kind of like superficial critique of the religious perspective of Christian and other early medieval cultures, is that like, oh, they denigrated the body. They thought, the body was inferior and it was the spirit or the soul that mattered. But this kind of text is really nice because the way you interpret it, if you interpret it this way, it's like it's saying, it's putting so much emphasis on how you should take care of your body and the house that your soul lives in, and then it will be harmonious and want to stay there and not want to leave and abandon your body because you're treating it like crap, essentially. At least that was the kind of the message that I saw here. Okay. So coming to the end, here's the very last one. I thought it was so interesting. I found this was in the Chobanian collection from 1940. In the very, very end of his book, there's a couple that was a lullaby. And I had fun trying to translate this one. The Armenian's really nice, and it again uses Arabic here with halat and bechalat. He says, So imagine the mother like putting the child to sleep and like singing this, which I'm not going to try to imitate. So, Arvodes chunis chalat, yertam ov perem bechalat, yertam lusengan perem, lusun aschere bechalat. Arvodes chunis chalat, kuamen derete bechalat. Tun al chalat panunis, kun chunis, artun guganas. They're saying something like, you're pretty, you have no flaw. Let's see, who else is flawless? Yertam Operem Bechala. I think, who should I bring up as an example of something else that's flawless? Yertam Lusengan Pedem. Let's see, the moon is flawless. The shining stars are spotless. You're pretty, you have no flaw. In every way, you're flawless. There's just one little thing. You won't sleep. You're always restless. Everything about the baby is perfect and beautiful and wonderful, except the damn thing won't go to sleep. Is kind of the message of this, or like the joke that's behind this Hayren lullaby. Horror. Okay, so this is a taste of Hayren's. You can see such a rich and diverse collection of material. This book that Manat Saganyan put together, it's like 1,000 pages and just one hayeren after another on these different topics. These texts must have ranged from, a wide, been composed over a wide range of time. And probably there were many, many others that, never made their way into writing, but it's great we have so many that there still are. And a lot of these ones, had there's a lot of material here that's never been translated or hasn't been, studied too much. There's a lot to explore. So hopefully this was interesting and fun to get a taste of these texts. So thank you everyone for your attention, and we can take some questions.